Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr. Honour. Mayor, thank you for permitting me to make a brief contribution to this debate, and I will keep it relatively brief. First and foremost, may I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for North, Southwark and Bermondsey for obtaining this debate. I think his contribution was very thoughtful, and it's a tribute, I think, to the fact that we have so many members here, and indeed the contributions both from Croydon and Havering, as well as, of course, from his own inner London borough, that this is a major issue that we all feel very strongly about. Now, I fear, to be brutally honest, we aren't here necessarily going to be able to find an enormous number of solutions. There were some suggestions by my honourable friend for Upminster a moment or two ago, and indeed in the honourable gentleman's own speech. And I have to confess that much of what I intend to say is putting on the record some of the concerns that apply in the city of Westminster. Indeed, in the last 6 months, there have been some 303 recorded youth violence incidents in Westminster, which was a 6% drop from the previous year. Now, whilst we can all be pleased with that reduction, and I take on board a number of the concerns about the reliability or otherwise of certain statistics, particularly in relation to the more serious aspects such as knife crime, it is very clear that we also need, in addressing this issue rightly today, to make the point that the very great majority of youngsters in London constitute a very positive, very valued part of London's population. They find themselves tarred with a particular brush as being a problem in youth, and I think it probably happened in all of our youths as well, but it seems to be an even more prevalent media story. And that's not to complain about the media. One fully understands that some of these terrible crimes do need to be covered. But the fact of the matter is that the great majority of London's youngsters are actually extremely hard-working, very thoughtful. All of us have been to our schools, and it never ceases to surprise us actually how well genned up many of our youngsters are on matters political and indeed in many other ways able to make a great contribution. And it must be extremely difficult to be brought up in the very busy parts, particularly of inner London, where there are relatively few things for youngsters to do when they reach their teens. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of crime, of course.
Sorry, just to say, to reinforce that, one of the most exciting things I've done in the last few weeks is to go to the City of London Academy in Bermondsey, where last Friday they had a whole school election for their head girl and their head boy. And they had a huge turnout at all the assemblies. They had 6 candidates, 3 girls and 3 boys. And that was a sign of real mature interest, excitement, enjoyment and fun. And this morning I had the privilege of being able to ring up the winners and say, good luck, guys. I hope you live up to your promises. But the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. There's so much good energy and good talent, and we just need to pick up those examples rather than be looking elsewhere.
I could mischievously suggest that maybe he should also speak to those who came in 3rd place. That would be a very typical thing for a Liberal Democrat to do. But, I guess I stepped into that one a little bit, didn't I? Yes. As is, however, often the case with a lot of crime, the perception in crime and the fear of it are often at the heart of the problem. And with the significant coverage of all of the recent knife and gun crime fatalities, young people naturally feel somewhat scared. And I've recently heard of pupils from Westminster City School who have articulated their concern about feeling intimidated by gangs of youths in the street and on buses. And it's important, I think, that young people believe that youth crime is taken seriously, that reported incidents are dealt with swiftly and effectively, and that there is a police presence, of course, on our streets and transport systems to make people feel safer. Of course, I give way.
Thank you, Mr. Honour. Does he agree with me that there is, the Honourable Gentleman agree with me, that there is a problem in perception with some schools, and I suspect this goes across the board, that those seem to be debating issues around youth violence, including some schools that have had police officers stationed with them, then report back that there is parental concern, particularly at the time of application, that the very fact that there is a police officer linked to the school and that there is a high-profile debate around youth violence, or that they are working with community organisations like the excellent Uncut who work in my area, puts off parents and is perceived to demonstrate that that school is in trouble. And does he agree with me that one of the things that we need to do is to urge upon all schools in London and elsewhere just to recognise this is a fact of life that we have to debate and address, and it is not a sign that that school is a sink school?
May I say this on an extremely well-made point? I don't think I need to add anything to it. I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. I have to say also, of course, the concern for youth crime also extends, of course, to older constituents, because the youth violence, of course, spills out into busy public areas. Many members will note that one of the most high-profile knife killings took place in my own constituency on the 13th of May last year. A 22-year-old man had his throat slit at the McDonald's on Oxford Street in front of horrified shoppers and rival groups who were hurling drinks, and the fights were taking place on the pavement. So it wasn't simply an issue of youth crime being somehow ring-fenced. It actually affects the population at large. Mr. Donald and I recently met with one of Britain's top trauma surgeons who operates at the Royal London Hospital. He confirmed that there are significant problems in the collection of evidence and the reporting of knife violence to the police. He recommends a much more joined-up approach between all the concerned authorities, from the police to the Home Office, to hospitals, to the Mayor and to the local authorities. And I'm pleased to see that the Mayor of London intends to emphasise the need for joined-up thinking in a strategic framework for London that he will launch next month. Similarly, in Westminster City Council, they're keen to develop information, sharing protocols and codes of practice with neighbouring authorities to work together on addressing serious youth crime violence that transcends boundaries. And as the Honourable Lady for Regent's Park and Kensington North rightly points out, in many of our schools in Westminster, indeed, a majority of children and indeed parents obviously are from outside the borough, so that joined-up thinking is all the more important. We've already discussed in this debate the complex factors that interact to increase the probability of a young person turning to violence: a lack of discipline, no role models, fractured families and personality type, a lack of support, peer group and sibling influence, and I'm afraid, Mr. Donald, very much the glamorisation of gang violence. It's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for us to be able to fully counter that. Now, just one final point I wanted to make, which was specifically in relation to initiatives that are taking place in Westminster City Council. Indeed, it's probably an appropriate day that I go forward on this, because the leader of the council has today come out with a very detailed plan about trying to address what he regards as the 3% of problem families that produce 97% of the workload in a whole range of different local government departments. But there's one particular initiative that I think is worth giving serious consideration to. Where an offender has been sentenced to community service, which is often some hundreds of hours of unpaid work requirement, the council would like to incorporate this unpaid work locally as part of a suitable youth diversionary project. I think this would also help to introduce a sense of responsibility and purpose, and hopefully also do its bit to reduce reoffending.